Hello, and welcome to episode 30 of the Nonprofit Leaders Network podcast. Jim Wehner, president of Focus Community Strategies in Atlanta, Georgia, will be sharing with us today about staying tuned in with your board and managing major transitions. Before we jump into that, I wanted to make sure you knew about a conference one of my good friends, Sandy Reese, is holding in September. At the Inspired Fundraising Retreat, you'll learn how to fully fund your budget and become the hottest nonprofit in town. Visit nonprofitleadersnetwork.com/Sandy to learn more and get registered for this live conference in Nashville, Tennessee.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Leaders Network podcast, where your host, KIRSTEN Bullock, interviews nonprofit CEOs and executive directors who share what's working. Show notes can be found at nonprofitleadersnetwork.com. Please add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or iTunes. Now, let's get on with the show.
Hi, Jim. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. Jim is the president at Focus Community Strategies in Atlanta, Georgia. You can read his full bio on the show notes page, but some interesting things I picked up while looking into his background is that he's an avid runner. He previously served as a pastor at a small church and apparently has a pretty good sense of humor. A great asset in the nonprofit world for sure. Jim, perhaps you could share a little bit of the background about your favorite pens being held hostage?
So I'm a little bit OCD about pens and colors. I journal regularly, and I use a different color each day, and my staff knows this, and so they stole my pens, and I got a text from a phone that I didn't recognize, and they said my pens were being held hostage for ransom, and they kept sending me pictures. It took, 3 or 4 days that it went on, and they left me with crayons instead. So I did all my paperwork, internal office paperwork, in crayons, and I drew pictures to put on everybody's doors, and just did it in crayon because that's what they left me with. And so anyway, then at the end of it, the whole time the pens had been taped to the bottom of my desk. I have a standing desk, and so they had taped it to the bottom of the desk, and I got them back safe and sound.
Oh, too funny. Well, before we jump into the questions, could you share a little bit about Focus Community Strategies for our listeners who aren't familiar with it?
Absolutely. Focus Community Strategies is a neighborhood redevelopment organization. We focus on underserved neighborhoods in southeast Atlanta. Currently, we serve a neighborhood that's called Historic South Atlanta. It's about 533 homes, mostly single family. There's some duplexes, not much multifamily in the neighborhood, but about 3,000 people in the neighborhood. It is heavily low income. And so we go in and we have a couple different divisions as far as an organization, and we do some what we call neighborhood engagement. That's looking for the people in the neighborhood that are doing work and helping them partner and to strengthen what they do in the neighborhood. And then we add to that mixed income housing. So we're really passionate about affordable home ownership and affordable rentals, and then we do some market rate or what we call workforce housing around that. And then we have a third division that does economic development, where we provide jobs and we build small businesses. So we have a coffee shop, a bike shop. We've got a small grocery in the neighborhood and some other things going on to help us employ at any given time 13 to 15 young people in the neighborhood. And as we're employing them, we're teaching job skills that the market would pay for at some point, so they can go out to market with their skill set and get paid accordingly. And it just connects the bigger economy back to a neighborhood that's underserved, that most of the businesses have left. So we do all that work one neighborhood at a time. We've worked in our current neighborhood for 16 years now, and we think we've got another 3 to 4 years there, and we would begin to look toward the next neighborhood to serve.
Great. So basically you go in, help to stabilize it, and then help the economy, and then step out and move to the next organization or the next neighborhood?
Yes, exactly.
Neat. Now, you've had the joy of moving into the role of president following a very strong, charismatic leader, Bob Lupton. I'm sure some of our listeners are familiar with him. And it sounds like you were pretty aware of the situation you were getting into. Could you share a little bit about your thought process at the time when you were coming into that role and what you did to prepare for that?
Yeah, so Bob and I have a great working relationship. He's been a mentor of mine for years. I've worked for SCS in a different component for 9 years. And as Bob was communicating to the FCS board that he was ready to step down and they were beginning the search process, I was helping the FCS board sort of think through, and others within the organization think through what FCS might look like, how we would sort of describe ourselves. So in terms of preparing myself, I feel like the answer to that is my previous resume in terms of business that I worked, and then as a pastor prior to coming to FCS to lead the housing arm of the work we do. There just was a lot of preparation in that. One of the things that we really had to think about is I'm a very different personality from Bob. So I think if Bob were on this call, he would say, he sort of, as a visionary leader, flies at that 30,000 foot level, and I fly at that 15,000 foot level. So as he and I talk about it, he would say, you need to increase altitude if you're going to lead at this level. And to increase altitude, you're going to need to let go of some of the day-to-day operational things that you do. At the same time, he would say the organization could benefit from somebody that flew a little bit lower. There's a little bit more strategic in directing a team and an organization. So what we really did as we came together is we really relied on my propensity and my strengths to gather a team and to add organizational clarity. And he really gave me freedom to do that as he stepped away from that role of president. And then the other thing we did is we kept him here. I know that doesn't always work when you have a leadership transition like this, but Bob has been gracious to me to allow me to take hold of SCS and make adjustments and changes. He's really been generous, I would say, in allowing me to change an organization that he led for 35 years. And so that's how we did it. We really talked with the board going in on how my strengths differed, and the board recognized that the organization needed that for this new time, and it's allowed me to really go forward in my skill set and not feel like I have to be the next Bob Lupton. That just isn't going to work. I think leaders like that come around once in a while, but not all of us are able to lead like Bob did. And so I think if I were trying to be the next Bob, I wouldn't be successful. So there's been a lot of freedom for me to be who I am and to help bring some organizational clarity and some strategic planning and things that Bob he just never really did. And to adjust the organization so that it could be successful and really hit with impact at those things that we were doing.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you're a big believer in leading with your strengths.
I am. In fact, I think often that if we're going through an evaluation process, that we focus on strengthening weaknesses, where I would rather hire or bring a teammate along that has strength in those areas where I'm weak, and focus on our strengths. I think we're better as a team when we do that. That doesn't mean I'm not self-aware and self-monitoring in areas where I'm weak. It just means I'll submit in my weaknesses to, for instance, my executive director. She and I have very different skill set, and we rely on each other to speak back and forth in terms of where we're weak. So if we were talking about an area that I'm not as strong in, she can lead the organization in that area. It's absolutely fine. And it helps us be stronger as a team. And so, for instance, in our economic development piece, so where we're doing a small grocery store and a coffee shop, the leader over that, we need that entrepreneurial bent. And so you don't need me in there trying to figure out how to do that, because I'd be more about stabilizing what we have, and we need him in there pushing it to the next level. So I really will try to staff around for areas of weakness and encourage people to really spend the majority of their time working in their strengths. I think it's better for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, when you were coming into this role, as I understand it, the three different entities that you talked about at the beginning, the housing, the economic development, all of that, there were three separate entities, three separate missions, three separate 501c3 numbers, separate boards. How did that play into the transition of your stepping into the role and then trying to merge those all at the same time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we were actually four separate nonprofits. We had three separate boards. Three of the nonprofits had their own executive director, and we all fundraised separately. So that could mean we were competing at times with certain funders locally. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, I would say we have, because we've been 35 years with a leader that is well thought of in Atlanta and beyond. He's an excellent communicator. So SCS had a tremendous amount of goodwill with the funding community and with the community at large, but we were extremely confusing. And so as I was stepping in, we were talking with different organizations and donors, what I would call key stakeholders that we rely on. We were talking with them, and over, they just kept communicating. Jim, as you step in, you've got to know SCS is from the inside out. Trying to look inside is terribly confusing. When you look at your work, so we see housing, we see the economic development piece, we see the jobs, we see the neighborhood engagement. We didn't have those terms in place, but they could say, well, I see these parts of SCS, but how they come together is really confusing. So we immediately, when I stepped in fact, as they were the FCS board, I was leading Charis Community Housing, which is FCS's housing arm, but it's a separate 501c3, had my own board, did our own fundraising. And so when FCS asked me to sort of step into the role of president, one of the first conversations I had with them, I wanted to know what their appetite was for change. And just saying, I am happy to follow in Bob's footsteps as our founder, and he has impacted me personally in the way I think about neighborhood development, poverty alleviation, serving the poor, how that fits with my faith. All those things Bob has impacted greatly. But I also am my own leader. I've got my own thoughts. And did the board have an appetite for the next leader? And the FCS board said yes to that, fortunately. And so as I stepped in, we started immediately through a fairly significant year-long strategic planning process. And in that planning process we had to answer the question, what do we do with four separate nonprofits and what had become 18 different programs? So we had a program for seniors in the neighborhood. We had a program for youth and youth development, after school program that was separate from that. We had housing, we had, our jobs and small businesses. So how do we take all that and make that more cohesive? And, we had leadership, we had boards in place. So the SCS board had to invite the other boards to meet and have a conversation about what a merge would look like. And so I immediately from the get-go started leading in that process. I just felt like it made us stronger as an organization. If you were to hear Bob talking about FCS, 2-3 years ago, as he's describing it, he talks about everything we do, but he would never describe that we're actually 4 different organizations working together. And so I stepped in, we began working with the board chair of FCS, and we immediately started that through that strategic planning, answering that question of how would we go about merging this organization, so that now here we are, almost 3 years later, not quite, just about a little over 2.5 years later. We're one organization. We've merged. So one organization, one mission statement, 4 key divisions that we've already described: neighborhood engagement, housing, economic development, consulting, and training. So it's one organization now. So it's been a lot of work to get there. And I would say, was actually telling someone, was asking me about it earlier today, and I was telling them the future just feels very bright in terms of we just feel like we're starting to really hit with impact on that one mission statement as the organizations are working together. And I just came out of a meeting, what I call our core leadership meeting, which is all our directors that used to be executive directors of different programs. They now are FCS employees and directors of their divisions. And there's just a cohesiveness and a teamwork about what we're doing, a support. Instead of competing for funding and resources, there's a support and recognizing that, okay, well, we can fund this initiative, but this initiative we have to hold on, and letting those leaders sort of work it out as to which initiative goes first. We can't do both, and it's been a lot of fun. I think the team is more cohesive than it's ever been.
Nice. It's always good when it ends up that way.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Now, I'm willing to bet that in the midst of all those changes, in the midst of those conversations, there may have been a time or two where in looking back, it might feel like it was a failure or a slipping up. And we've all had those times when we've fallen on our face. Is there a time in the midst of all that where that happened that you wouldn't mind sharing with us, and then what you learned from it?
Yeah, so I think, I don't know if I would call it falling on my face, but I would say this is something we had to address. So we had 2, what I would call legacy programs. They've been part of FCS for years and years, and they just weren't having the impact that we started out with. And so both of these programs that I'm thinking of were 30 years old. And so you think about the amount of investment and people that participate as volunteers and those members of our staff that work in those programs, the funders that supported it, them over the years. So we had to be honest with ourselves about what is the actual impact. And it's very easy to measure activity and say we're being successful versus measuring outcomes and say we're hitting with impact. And so we had to have a lot of conversation at the board level, because both of these programs that I'm thinking of, both of them, the board were heavily committed to. And so we had to have conversations about outcomes. And the board had heard for years us talk about activity. And so I began to say, good activity, but limited outcome, is there a way for us to make adjustments to the program? And so the answer is one of them we adjusted and one of them we closed down. And it was difficult to close down the one because we were known for it in Atlanta in terms of what we had done. But what it was costing us to run for the outcome we were having, it wasn't a program that, if you really looked at outcomes, that was one that you'd want to just keep going the way it is. So it either had to change drastically, and that meant a significant reinvestment, and there just wasn't that kind of energy around it. So we ended up closing it. And so this is where I would say some of the difficult moments of leadership come for me, because we're taking legacy programs that the organization is known for. There's a sense of risk that you have as a nonprofit leader, that you have donors heavily connected to it. And they're going to know, okay, our founder's not here any longer, and they're not doing this program that we like to support. So there's this sense of risk. But we kept moving forward, communicating our mission, talking about not what we were closing down, but what we were moving to. And, here we are. So the program that we closed down, nobody misses it anymore because we're doing better programming on the other end of it. And so what we have now, it just hits with so much more impact than what we had before. The other one, we were able to adjust. We were able to change the product of that program into something better that's more cohesive to the neighborhood. And because of that, we end up with a better program with better outcomes that the whole neighborhood feels. But I would say the time in there, that variable of people seeing you make leadership decisions to stop what you're always known for and re-communicate what you're going to be about, that it just takes sort of guts and determination. And some days you just put your head down and keep walking. We had talked about at one point recently that some of the board members were still trying to grasp what we were doing. And, at this point, we're thinking board members are on, some of our staff still communicating with as though we were running the old program. And so those kind of things you keep working on, you keep pushing, you keep communicating the right things in the right direction. I would say you have to be careful to make sure you're not just making cuts the whole time, but that you're heading to something better. And then I think people are sort of willing to come with in that process, including recipients of your work. So I would say that the recipients of the two programs that I'm talking about, they love what we do now compared to what we were doing before. But in the meantime, they were very clear in what they felt. And so you sort of have to weather that and move through. And there's all sorts of learning opportunities in terms of communication and honoring the dignity that people have, and sort of humbly pushing forward without causing further offense and those kind of things. There's all sorts of lessons in there day to day.
Oh, absolutely. And it takes a lot of, it was really brave to go ahead and make that decision, especially early in your tenure. But it sounds like it was exactly what the organization needed. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree.
It's amazing how quickly these calls go by. But are there any closing words you could offer to provide encouragement or inspiration for our listeners?
That's a great question, and I would love to be able to tie everything up and be encouraging. I would say that for those of you that are leading nonprofits and trying to figure out the day-to-day, you're waiting for resources to come in on the back end to allow you to hit with impact on the front end, to stay the course. And and know that focusing on those outcomes on the other end, that you'll get there, and it's worth the effort. Or the scriptures tell us not to become weary with doing good, and I think staying in that place of being hopeful helps everybody sort of move along in terms of whether you're talking about staff within the organization or key stakeholders that you talk to or recipients that benefit from the work that you do.
Great. And do you have a favorite scripture related to hopefulness?
That's a great question. My personal mission statement is out of Ephesians chapter 5, 15 and 16. Make the most of every moment, and I would say that that I just tend to do that. Let's make the most of every moment because we know the times are evil, and so I'm usually about that, trying to make the most of every moment.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jim, for joining us today. And thank you to our listeners for everything you do to make the world a better place.
Thanks for listening to the Nonprofit Leaders Network podcast with Kirsten Bullock. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll check out our prior episodes and that you'll pass along our web address, nonprofitleadersnetwork.com, to your friends and colleagues in the nonprofit sector.